Black River had already decided I would die in it. I felt the decision in the cold, not the shock of the water, but the certainty of it, the way it closed over my mouth and did not hurry, patient as a thing that had swallowed kings before and would again. My horse was gone. My sword was gone, torn from my hand when Vorn's men drove us off the Ashenford causeway, and the old stones gave way beneath the crush. I remember the arrow in my shoulder more as weight than as pain, a stone sewn under the skin, dragging that side of me down while the current took the rest. I was Halden, River King of Vihorros, Wolf King of the Blackwater Valley, and no man in 3 generations had put me on my knees. The river did it in the space of one breath. It rolled me, and I could not tell the surface from the deep, and the last thing I knew with any clearness was that I did not want to die in the dark where no one would find me, not for the crown, not for the pack, but for the plain animal reason that a man does not want to be lost. Then the cold changed. It went from a drowning to a dragging. Something had my collar. I have carried grown warriors off a field. I know what it costs a strong man to move dead weight through mud. Whoever had hold of me was not strong. I could feel the effort in the jerks, the way I came a hand's breadth at a time, the way the pulls stopped and started while she caught her breath and set her heels and hauled again. I was too far gone to help. I could only feel the reeds rake my face, and then at last the give of soft bank under my back and a weight collapse across my chest, and a voice, a woman's, breaking with the strain of it, say to me, or to herself, or to the river, "No, not you too, not one more." Then nothing for a long time. When I came back, it was to firelight on a low ceiling of woven willow, and the smell of some green thing crushed and simmering, and pain. The pain was honest, at least. It meant the arrow was out. I lay still the way a wounded animal lies still, learning the room before it lets anyone know it is awake. And what I learned was this: a single room, a hearth, dried herbs hanging in bunches from the withies overhead, a doorway curtained with hide, and a woman with her sleeves pushed to the elbow, grinding something in a stone bowl, her back to me, unaware that the man she had pulled from the Black River had opened his eyes. She was not what a king's eye is trained to notice. She wore no ornament. Her dress was the gray of river clay, mended at the shoulder with a thread that did not quite match. Her hair was bound back plainly and coming loose at the temples, the way hair does when someone has been working too long without stopping. But there was a stillness in the way she worked, an economy, no wasted motion, that a warrior recognizes, because it is the same stillness a good swordsman has, the stillness of someone who has done a hard thing so many times that the fear has been worn out of it. I meant to speak like a king. What came out was a ruin of a voice. Where? She did not startle. She only turned, and I saw her face for the first time, and I will tell you plainly that nothing in it announced a destiny. A tired face, a young woman's face gone older than its years around the eyes. But when her gaze met mine, the strangest thing happened, and it is the thing I have never been able to explain to any man who has not felt it. The wound went quiet. Not the arm still burned, but the deeper thing, the thing that had been screaming under my breastbone since the causeway broke, the thing that had nothing to do with the arrow, that went still, the way a hall goes still when the right person walks into it. I had heard the old wives of my pack speak of the fated bond as a fire, a lightning, a wolf rising in the blood. No one had ever told me it might arrive as silence, as a hurt that simply stopped for as long as she was in the room. "You're on the west bank," she said, "the reed flats below Ashenford. You've been fevered 2 nights. She crossed to me, and without asking leave, a thing no one had done to my person in 20 years, she laid the back of her hand against my brow, then my throat, reading me. Her hands were cold from the river and rough from work, and I did not want her to take them away. The fever's broken. You'll keep the arm. You lost a great deal of blood and you swallowed half the river, so you'll be weak a while. And if you try to stand tonight, you'll fall in my fire and burn us both down, so don't." "Who?" I started. "Drink first, ask after." She lifted my head with a care that was almost impersonal, the practiced care of someone who has held up many heads, and put a cup to my lips, and it was bitter and warm, and I drank it because I could not do otherwise. Then she set my head back down as gently as if I were a thing that might break, and I, Halden, who had broken men with a look, let her, because I had no strength to be a king, and beneath that, because I did not want to be one just then. It had been a very long time since anyone had touched me, as though I were a man to be mended, rather than a power to be managed. "My name is Eira," she said when I had finished the cup. "I keep the far crossing. I pulled you out of the water because the water was going to keep you, and I've a rule about that." She sat back on her heels. "Now, what's yours?" And there, in the first hour of knowing her, I told my first lie to the woman who had saved my life. "Halleck," I said, "it is a name for a nobody, a boatman's name, a name off any bank, a soldier separated from my company. Understand why? I was the Wolf King of Vihoros, and I was lying half drowned on the west bank of the Black River, in the country of the men who had just tried to kill me. If Vorn's people learned their king had washed up alive, they would comb these reeds with fire and spears until they found me, and they would not care who had sheltered me. To speak my name in that hut was to hang a mark over her door. So I gave her the boatman's name, and told myself it was to protect her, and only much later admitted the other half of the truth, that Halleck the soldier was allowed to lie in the warm and be tended by gentle hands, and King Halden was not. A king is never simply cared for. A king is invested in. I had forgotten there was any other way to be looked after until Eira looked after me expecting nothing, not knowing there was anything to expect. "Well, Halleck," she said, and something in the flatness of it told me she did not entirely believe the name and had decided not to press it, which was its own kind of mercy. "Sleep. I've a crossing to run at first light whether you like it or not." She ran it. I learned the rhythm of her days from my palate before I could stand to see them. She was up before the gray came, and I would hear the drag of the ferry rope and the low words she gave to whoever waited on the bank, and sometimes the clink of a coin, and more often not, and once a whole morning of a child crying and Eira's voice going soft and steady under it the way it had gone under my drowning. She fed the fire and fed me and went out and came back, and in the between times she did the other work, the work the bank did not thank her for. Because there was a war on the Black River, and Eira tended both banks of it. I did not understand at first why the reed folk who used her crossing spoke to her so short, why a woman would pay her ferry toll and then spit past her shoulder into the water. I understood it the third day, when a man was carried to her door on a hurdle, one of Vorn's raiders by his gear, a boy really, with his leg open to the bone, and I watched from my corner as she took him in and worked over him for 2 hours while the men who had carried him waited outside and would not come under her roof, and when he lived, they took him away without a word of thanks. And the next day the toll at her crossing was thin, because the West Bank folk had heard she'd healed an Eastern man again. "They think I don't choose a side," I said to her that night, when the boy was gone and she sat by the fire with her hands finally still, looking older than the afternoon had left her. "I don't," she said. "I chose a long time ago never to choose. My mother kept this crossing before me, and she pulled a Vihoros scout out of the flood the same winter she birthed me, and the West Bank never forgave her the scout and the East Bank never thanked her for the daughter, and she died having made both banks angry and a great many men alive who wouldn't be otherwise." She turned a stick in the fire. "I decided her account came out ahead. So, I don't ask a wounded man which water he bled on. I've been called a traitor by both sides in the same week for it. It's cheaper than you'd think, once you stop minding." I lay in the dark and thought about my own hall, where a healer's first question over any man on a slab was whose banner he wore, so we would know whether to spend the good herbs on him. I thought about it for a long time. The bond, I should tell you, does not work the way the songs claim. The songs say a man knows his fated mate in the first instant, that the wolf rises and howls and there is no mistaking it. Perhaps for some it is like that. For me it came the way the river takes a bank grain by grain, so slow you cannot see it moving, and then one day the shape of the land is changed, and you cannot remember when. It came in the wound going quiet when she crossed the room. It came in the way I began to listen for the drag of the ferry rope, and feel the day arrange itself around her return. It came the fourth night, when I woke thrashing out of the drowning again, back under the black water with the arrow in me, and it was her hand on my chest that pulled me up, not out of the dream but out of the river all over again, the same weight, the same grip, and she said, "You're on the bank. You're on the bank, Halleck, I've got you." And the wound went so quiet it was almost sweetness, and I understood with a plain man's clarity, king or no king, that I did not want to be pulled out of any water by any other hand for the rest of my life. I did not say it. A man who has given a false name has forfeited the right to say true things. But I began, in small ways, to try to be worth the saving. I could not yet stand a full day, but I could sit, and I could mend. I have good hands for a man of war. My mother taught me to fish, and to knot before my father taught me to fight. And Yaira's ferry rope was frayed to a thread at the splice, a thing that would drop her and a boat of strangers into the flood some bad morning. So I asked for the rope and the marlinspike, and I relayed the splice while she was out on a crossing, and when she came in and saw it she stood in the doorway a long moment saying nothing. "You did this," she said. "I know knots. A boatman's knots." She came and knelt by the splice and ran her thumb over it, testing, and her mouth did a thing that was almost a smile and thought better of it. "That's a V. Horrow's back splice. The kind their warboats use." She looked at me across the hut, and I saw her put it beside the Too Good name and the sword callus on my right hand that a boatman does not have, and the way I had said my company like a man who was used to companies obeying him. She saw all of it. She said none of it. "You're an Eastern soldier, then, from over the water. Does it change your rule?" "No," she said, and went to the fire. "It never has. But you should know that if the West Bank learns I've an Eastern fighter under my roof who's more than he says, they'll burn the roof and me under it. So whoever you are, Halleck, when you can walk, you'll want to walk east. For both our sakes." She said it evenly, the way she said everything, but I heard the cost in it, that she was telling me to go while she was making me broth, that her kindness and her sense had come to a fork, and she was choosing sense out loud and kindness with her hands. And I lay there and hated the boatman's name in my mouth, because the true thing I wanted to say was, "I am the Wolf King of V. Horrors, and the men who broke your causeway and choke your crossing with war are the men I would put down for you. And if you will let me stand up, I will make this river safe from bank to bank, and you will never again have to choose never to choose." And I could say none of it, because to say it was to put the spears at her door that very night. So I said, "East then, when I can walk." And I began, God help me, to hope I would not heal too quickly. Understand what she was to me by then. I had been surrounded by devotion my whole life and starved of it. There is a hunger a powerful man doesn't know he has until it's fed, the hunger to be, for 1 hour, not a king. Every soul in V. Horrors needed something from me, protection, judgment, favor, permission, and gave me loyalty as the price of it, and I had come to think loyalty and love were the same coin. They are not. Yaira needed nothing from me. She did not know there was anything to need. She pulled me from the water and mended my arm and fed me her thin broth and told me to leave, and in all of it there was not one grain of wanting anything back, and I discovered that being cared for by someone who wants nothing from you is a different substance entirely from being served. The way spring water is a different substance from wine. I had been drinking wine my whole life and dying of thirst. The trouble came on the 9th day, and it came, as trouble does, from both banks at once. First it was Vaughan's men. I heard them before I saw them, the wrong sound on the reed flats, boots where boots had no reason to be, and Yaira was out at the crossing, and I was alone in the hut with a mended arm and no blade. I got to the doorway on my feet for the first time, holding the withy frame, and looked through the gap in the hide, and there were 4 of them coming along the bank in the raider's harness of the Eastern warlord Vaughan's harness. The men who had drowned me, and they were not crossing. They were searching. They walked with their eyes on the mud, reading it, and one of them carried a thing that turned my stomach. A warboat's grapnel, the kind you drag a flood with when you are looking for a body and mean to be sure of it. They had not confirmed their kill. Vorn had thrown the Wolf King into the Black River and could not be certain the river had kept him. And a warlord who is not certain his rival is dead is a warlord who cannot rest. So he had sent men down every bank of the flats to find the king of Vihoros, alive to finish or dead to display. And they were 40 paces from the crossing where Eira stood with a boatful of strangers, entirely unaware that the drowned king they hunted was standing in a healer's doorway watching them come. I did the only thing my body would let me do. I stepped back into the dark of the hut and I lay down on the pallet and I pulled the blanket to my chin and I made myself, by main force, into a sick nobody, a drowned soldier of no account. Because if I stood at the door as a king, they would take one look at the width of my shoulders and the mark of the crown torque worn pale into my throat and they would know. And then they would put Eira to the question. And I knew exactly how Vorn's men asked questions. The hide curtain was pulled aside. A raider filled the doorway, blocking the gray light. "You," he said, "who's the man?" Eira had come up the bank behind him. I could see her past his shoulder, and I saw her take in the scene, the raider in her doorway, me on the pallet, and I saw her decide something in half a breath. "A drowned fool," she said, coming in past him as though he were furniture, crossing to me, laying that cold, practiced hand on my brow. "West Bank boatman went into the flood chasing a lost net like an idiot 3 days ago. Fever's got his wits. He'll likely die of it." She said it with a healer's boredom, and then she leaned close over me, and this is the thing I have never forgotten. She pressed her thumb hard into the wound on my shoulder, and I, who had not cried out when they cut the arrowhead free, cried out now, a genuine broken sound because it genuinely hurt, and it was the most convincing thing that could have happened, and she knew it would be. She made me scream to save me. A drowning man does not have a war wound. But a fevered fool who cries at a touch is nobody worth a warlord's grapnel. The raider looked at me a moment longer, the sweat she'd wrung out of me, the gray of my face, the pathetic noise still dying in my throat, and his lip curled and he lost interest, the way a hunter loses interest in a thing too small to be his quarry. "Riverwitch," he said to Eira, not kindly, "you'll tell us if an Eastern fighter comes to your door, a big man, highborn, may be hurt." "I'll tell no one anything about anyone," she said. "Same as always, and you can burn me for it, same as always. Now get off my floor, you're dripping on my herbs." He went. I heard them move on down the bank, dragging the flood, and I lay shaking under the blanket, and Eira sat down beside me and did not touch me for a long moment, and when she did speak, her voice was not even. "A big man," she said quietly. "Highborn may be hurt." She was looking at the pale ring worn into the skin of my throat where a heavy torque had sat for 20 years. An Eastern fighter that a warlord's own raiders are dragging a whole flood to find. She turned her head and looked at me, and there was no anger in it, only a kind of tired dread. "Just how much roof am I about to lose over you, Halleck?" And I could not lie to her again. I had lied to keep the spears from her door, and the spears had come to her door anyway, and the lie had bought her nothing but ignorance in the exact moment she most needed the truth. So I sat up against the pain, and I met her eyes, and I gave her the thing I had been hoarding. "Not Halleck," I said. "Halden of Vihoros." I watched the name land. "The man Vorn drowned at the causeway, the one his grapnels are looking for." I made myself say the last of it. "The Wolf King of the Eastern Bank. I am the war that comes to your crossing. I've been lying in your house for 9 days letting you believe I was a boatman, because the moment you knew what I was, you were in danger, and I told myself the lie was for you, but it kept me here in the warm being tended by the one person alive who didn't want anything from me, and I wanted that more than I've wanted anything since I was a boy, and I am ashamed of it. That is the whole truth. You saved a king, and I let you think you'd saved a fool." The fire ticked. On the flats faint, the grapnel dragged its slow hooks through the flood. Yaira did not rage. I almost wish she had. It would have been easier to bear than what she did, which was to go very still, and then to laugh, one low, broken breath of a laugh with no humor in it at all. "The Wolf King," she said. "I pulled the Wolf King of Vihoros out of the water by his collar." She pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes. "Do you know how many men have died on this river because of your war, yours and Vorn's? Do you know how many I've buried on this bank because two great men across the water can't agree whose the Fords are? I've dug graves for boys from your side and boys from his in the same week and read them the same words because I don't know your gods from his, and half the time neither did they. They were just farmers with spears." She dropped her hands. Her eyes were wet and furious and under the fury frightened. "And now the war himself is in my house, and I saved his life. I saved the war." "You saved a man," I said. "I don't have the luxury of that difference," she said. "You do. Kings do. Down here on the bank, the man and the war are the same thing wearing one skin, and I hauled it out of the flood and gave it my mother's broth." She stood. She was shaking now, and I understood it was not fear of me. She had never once been afraid of me, not when I was a stranger, not now. It was the weight of a thing too large for the small, brave account she kept. "You have to go east. Tonight. I don't care that you can barely stand. If Vorn learns you were here, he'll do to this crossing what he does to everything. And if your own people find you here, they'll want to know why the Wolf King's been sleeping soft in a Western witch's hut. And either way, the first thing anyone burns is me." She was right. That was the worst of it. She was completely right, and every year of my kingship agreed with her. Send the danger east out of the reeds back to the pack and take the war away from the woman who kept the crossing. I should have gone. I did not go because the wolves came first. They came in the deep of that same night, and I knew the sound of them before Yaira did, the pad and the panting, the particular near silence of pack wolves moving with purpose, the wrongness in the reed frogs going quiet all at once in a spreading ring. I sat up. "Douse the fire," I said, and something in my voice made her do it without asking, and we sat in the dark, and the dark filled up with the sound of them circling the hut. "Vorn's dogs," she breathed. No, my throat had gone tight. "Mine. The scattered wolves of Vihoros. When a wolf king goes down, his pack does not disband, it hunts. My great gray, the old one who had run at my stirrup for a dozen years, would have taken the pack off the broken causeway and cast up and down the banks for my scent through 9 days of flood and rain, and here at last, faint under willow smoke, they had found it. I heard the hide curtain nose aside. I heard the huge soft weight of the old gray come into the room, and I heard Yaira go absolutely still, because a river healer knows exactly how much wolf is standing in her doorway by the sound of its breathing. "Don't move," I whispered. "He won't." But the old gray did not come to me. He crossed the black of the hut. I felt him pass me, felt the brush of his flank, and my heart clenched because I thought he did not know me after 9 days of river stink and fever. I thought my own wolf had forgotten his king, and he went to Yaira, who sat frozen against the withy wall, and he lay down. He put the great weight of his gray head into her lap in the dark where she had pulled a drowning king out of the flood, and he sighed the enormous sigh of a creature setting down a thing it has carried too far, and behind him, one by one, in through the hide, the pack came, and they did not come to me. They came to her. They lay down around her in the dark, a ring of wolves, their sides against her legs, their breath filling the little room, and Yaira sat rigid in the middle of them with her hands raised and trembling and did not understand, and I did. They had tracked their king for 9 days, and they had found him, and they had walked past him to lie at the feet of the woman who kept him alive. The wolf knows the mate before the man will admit her. Every old wife in my valley could have told her so. The pack does not choose for rank or for beauty or for what a woman can give a king. It chooses for the bond, the true one, the one the river had been wearing into my bank grain by grain for 9 days, and my whole pack casting up and down the flood for their lost lord, had come to the willow hut and found not one thing worth kneeling to but two, and knelt to the smaller one. To the healer. To Ira of the far crossing, who did not choose sides, and whom the wolves of Vihoros had just, in the plainest language their kind possesses, chosen for their Luna. Halden, she said, very low, not moving, why are they doing this? Because they know something I only just learned, I said, and my voice was not a king's voice at all. Ira. The bond you've heard the river folk speak of, the fated thing, the thing the songs are about. I found her hand in the dark, among the warm weight of the wolves, and she let me. It doesn't announce itself. It came to me as the wound going quiet whenever you're near. It's why the pain stopped the first time you looked at me. It's why my own wolves have walked past their king to put their heads in your lap. You are the one the songs are for. You are mine, not to own. I don't mean it that way. I'll never mean it that way. I mean I'm yours. I have been since you pulled me up and said, not one more. The wolves only came to tell you what I was too much a coward and a liar to say. For a long time she said nothing. In the dark the wolves breathed. Then she said in a voice gone strange and thick, you have to understand what I am. I'm a witch to both banks. I have nothing. I bury boys for a living. Whatever this bond is, it can't want me. Kings don't wash up at the doors of women like me and mean it in the morning. This one washed up at yours, I said, and means it in the morning. We might have gone on so till dawn in the dark with the pack if the far bank had led us. It did not. The old gray's head came up. In an instant the whole pack was on its feet, a low sound starting in a dozen throats, and I knew that sound, and I was already reaching for the only weapon in the hut, the marlinspike, a poor iron thing, when the hide was torn wholesale from the doorway and torchlight fell in, and I looked up expecting Vorn's raiders come back to finish the drag. It was not Vorn's men. It was mine. Ledric stood in the doorway with a torch in one fist and his blade in the other and 20 of my house warriors at his back, and his face, when the torch found me sitting on a witch's pallet in a witch's hut with a witch's hand in mine and my own pack ringed around her like a wall, went through more feelings than I had ever seen it hold. Relief first, his king alive. Then hard on it, suspicion and worse than suspicion. Because Ledric was my war second, the most loyal blade I owned and the most frightened man in my kingdom, frightened the way careful men are frightened, always seeing the trap, and what he saw in that hut was a trap. My king. He did not lower the blade. His eyes went from me to Ira to the wolves and back to me, doing the arithmetic that a war second does. You live 9 days, we've hunted every bank of the flood, and then colder, and we find you here on the west shore, in the house of a western healer. Whole and mended, and his gaze flicked to our joined hands and away as though it had touched something foul, well kept. She pulled me from the river, Ledric. So she says. He came a half step in, and the pack's growl deepened, and he stopped, and I saw how much it cost his pride to be halted at the door of his own king's refuge by his own king's wolves. A western witch finds the drowned wolf king, alone, helpless, the greatest prize on this river, and instead of running to Vorn with it for a warlord's ransom, she hides him 9 days and mends him and puts her hand in his. He shook his head, and his voice, when it came again, was almost gentle with the awful reasonableness of the truly afraid. My king, this is a snare. She has kept you alive to spring some trap of Vorn's. The wolves are witched. No woman of the West Bank does what she's done for nothing. Let me take her. I'll have the truth of her by morning, and then we'll get you home. And there it was, the whole shape of my life, come to stand in a doorway with a torch. On one side, 20 loyal swords and my truest careful servant, offering me the safe reading, the sensible reading, the reading in which the world works the way a war second needs it to work. No gift is free, every kindness is a lever, and a woman of the enemy bank who saves your life must be planning to sell it. And on the other side, on a healer's pallet, the one soul in the world who had wanted nothing from me, ringed by wolves who had walked past their king to choose her. I got to my feet. It cost me. 9 days down and I swayed doing it, and Yaira half rose to catch me, and I put out a hand to tell her no. Not because I did not want her hand, but because there are things a king must do standing on his own legs or not at all. I stood in the ruin of a body Vorn had drowned and Yaira had rebuilt, and I put myself between the torchlight and the woman on the pallet, and I found from somewhere under the weakness the voice. Sheathe it, Ledric. My king. Sheathe it, not loud, he sheathed it. 20 years of that voice, his hand moved before his fear could argue. Now hear your king, and hear him carefully, because I am going to say a thing to you that I need every man behind you to carry back across the water and repeat until it is law in Vhoros. I steadied myself against the withy frame and made them wait, and made myself worthy of the standing. You look at this woman and you see a snare because you cannot imagine a kindness that isn't a lever. I know why. I taught you that. I have run this kingdom for 20 years on your arithmetic, that no gift is free, that every hand offered wants something back, that a king must weigh the cost of a cup of water before he drinks it. And it kept me alive, Ledric, and it made me a stranger to my own life, and I did not know how starved I was until I lay 9 days in this hut being tended by someone who had never heard my name and could not have wanted a single thing from a drowned fool named Halleck. I looked at the men behind him, farm-bred boys most of them, the same boys Yaira dug graves for on both banks. She did not know I was a king. Do you understand that? For 9 days she mended a nobody. There was no lever to pull, because there was no king to pull it on. She fed a stranger her dead mother's broth and told him to leave for his own good, and hid him from Vorn's grapnels at the risk of her own roof and her own neck, for nothing. For the plain reason that the river was going to keep him, and she has a rule about that. My voice was going, and I let it. The wolves know what she is. My own pack cast up and down this flood for 9 days hunting their king, and when they found the hut, they walked past me and lay at her feet, because a wolf knows a Luna when a war-second can only see a witch. I will trust the noses of my pack over the arithmetic of my fear. So will you. Ledric's jaw worked. He was not a bad man. He was a frightened one, and I had just told him, in front of 20 witnesses, that the fear he had served me with faithfully for 20 years was a poverty. That is a hard thing to hear standing in a doorway. But he was mine, and he lowered his eyes, and the fight went out of his shoulders, and he said, "Lo, the war does not stop because the wolves like a healer, my king. Vorn thinks you dead, when he learns otherwise." "When he learns otherwise," I said, "he will come to this crossing. Yes, I have thought of little else." And this was the hinge of it, the thing I had been circling all night, and I turned from Ledric and looked down at Yaira, who sat among the wolves with her face lifted to me, and I gave her the truth I owed her most of all, the one that mattered more than the bond, because a bond that traps is no better than a warlord's grapnel. "Yaira, here is what my war-second says, and he is not wrong. The moment I set foot back in Vhoros as a living king, this river runs red again. Vorn will come for this ford to be sure of me, and my pack will come to hold it, and your crossing, your mother's crossing, the one place on this whole flood where a wounded man is never asked which water he bled on, becomes the very ground the war is fought over. Because of me, because you pulled me out." I knelt then, not the kneel of acclaiming. I was too weak for grand gestures, and she would have hated one. I knelt because my legs were done, and because I wanted to be level with her face when I said it. So I am not going to stand here and tell you the bond means you're mine and it's decided. It isn't decided. Nothing about you was ever going to be decided by anyone but you. That's the whole of what makes you the woman the wolves chose. Here is your choice, and it is a real one. My men will take me east tonight, and I will never send a spear to this bank, and you will keep your crossing, and you will never see me again, and the war will stay a thing that happens to other fords. That door is open. The ferry's at the bank. I will go through it if you tell me to, and I will not think one less of you, and I will spend the rest of a lonely reign glad you're safe." The wolves breathed. Ledric stood very still. "Or," I said, and it was the hardest word I have ever spoken because it asked for everything, You come east with me not as a king's prize, not as a witch dragged over the water, but as the Luna my pack has already named, and we end it. Not your way of never choosing, and not my way of two great men bleeding a river white. Your mother's way made a law. A crossing where no wounded man is asked his bank, held not by one witch alone against both shores, but by a wolf king's whole power. I will make peace with Vorn, or I will make an end of him, but either way I will make this ford the one place on the Black River where the war stops, because the woman who taught me the war and the man were not the same thing as standing on it. I ran out of breath and out of eloquence together. That's the choice. Stay and be safe and free of me. Or come and help me make your mother's account come out ahead for the whole river instead of one crossing at a time. I'll take the ferry east on your word either way. It's yours. For a long moment she only looked at me. And I want you to know, because it is the truest measure of her, that she did not weigh the crown. I saw her not weigh it. A lesser woman, an ordinary woman, would have thought of the throne, the safety, the end of digging graves in the cold. Yaira thought of none of it. What she said, when she finally spoke, went straight past every glittering thing I had laid at her feet to the only part of it she cared about. You'd truly make this crossing a place the war can't touch, she said. Both banks, a boy from Vorn's side and a boy from yours, carried up the same hurdle and mended the same, and no one burns the roof for it. Both banks, I said. I swear it on the pack that chose you. She looked down at the old gray wolf with his head in her lap, and she laid her rough, cold healer's hand on his skull, and the great creature leaned into it, and something in her face broke and remade itself. Then I'm not coming east as anybody's Luna, she said, and my heart dropped like a stone in the flood, and then she went on, not yet. First you'll get well enough to sit a horse without falling off it, which is another 3 days at least. I'm the healer and I'll say when. And then we don't run east in the night like thieves. We cross at the ford, in the daylight where both banks can see. She lifted her chin, and there it was, the stillness of the swordsman, the fear worn out of her long ago. If this crossing is going to be the place the war stops, then it starts stopping at the crossing in front of everyone, or it's just another king carrying off another woman in the dark, and I've buried enough of that story. We do it in the light or we don't do it. That's my choice, Halden. Take it or take the ferry. I began to laugh. I could not help it. It hurt my chest, and I laughed anyway, the first true laugh in 9 days or 9 years, because I had knelt to offer a woman a crown, and she had answered by giving me an order about how to end my war, and Ledric was staring, and the wolves' tails had begun, uncertainly, to move. In the light, then, I said, both banks watching. On your ford. We did it on the 7th morning, when I could stand a full day and sit a horse, and Yaira could no longer find a reason in her healer's arithmetic to make me wait. Word travels a river faster than any horse. By the time the gray came up over the reeds, both banks of the Ashenford ford were lined with people. The West Bank folk who had called her witch, the East Bank folk who had never thanked her, and threaded among them the harnessed men of both war camps, Vorn's raiders on their shore and my Vihoro's warriors on mine, drawn up wary and armed and waiting to see which way the morning would break. Because the whole flood knew by now that the Wolf King had not drowned, that he was alive on the West Bank in a witch's keeping, and every soul on the Black River had come to see whether that meant the war was about to end or about to swallow them all. I rode down to the ford with my pack around me and Ledric grim at my side, and the old gray running at my stirrup where he had run for a dozen years. And on the far bank Yaira came down alone to the water's edge on foot, in her clay-gray dress mended at the shoulder with the thread that did not match, carrying nothing, a fairy healer walking down to her own crossing. And the whole river held its breath, because a king in harness with a war pack on one bank and a lone woman on the other is a picture the Black River had seen before and knew the bloody end of. I did not let it end that way. I swung down from the horse at the water's edge, slowly, still favoring the arm, and I let them all see that I favored it. Let them see the king of Vihoros was a mended man and not ashamed of the mending. And I walked out into the ford on foot to meet her, one bank's water to the other, so that no man could say afterward that she had been fetched or carried or claimed. We met in the middle in the shallows, where the two banks' waters run together and there is no telling east from west, and I stopped a pace from her, and I raised my voice so both shores would carry it. People of both banks, a river crossing is a good place to be heard, the water throws the voice. You know me, I am Halden Wolf-King of Vihoros that Vorn threw into this flood 9 days past and could not keep drowned. You want to know how I live? I put my hand out not to take her, only open, offered in the space between us. This woman lives it for me, Yaira of the far crossing, that both your banks have named which and neither has thanked. She pulled me from the Black River not knowing my name, and mended me not knowing my crown, and hid me from the grapnels at the risk of her own roof, for nothing, because she keeps her mother's rule and never asks a drowning man which water he bled on. I turned slowly, so both shores had my face. Every one of you has carried a boy to her door, east bank and west. She mended them the same and buried them the same, and you called her traitor for it in the same breath. I stand here to tell you she was the only one on this whole river who was never a traitor to anything, because she was loyal to the one thing worth it, that a wounded man is a man before he is a banner. The banks were silent. Even Vorn's raiders were silent, and I saw among them the boy with the opened leg, healed now, standing up on his own shore, staring at the woman who had done it. So hear your Wolf-King make a law of it, I said, and I let the whole flood have it. From this dawn, the ford at Ashenford is the crossing where the war does not come, not for Vihoros, not for Vorn. A wounded man carried to this bank is not asked his side. A boat crossing this water is not stopped for its banner. And any man of mine who breaks that law will answer to me, and I will send word to Vorn this very morning that any man of his who breaks it, I will consider his sworn enemy and mine both, and let him make peace on that ground or make war against a king the river couldn't drown. I lowered my voice then, and gave the last of it not to the banks but to her, though the water carried it anyway. And I make this law not as a gift I'm handing down, but as the first act of a reign I mean to share. Because the wolves of Vihoros cast up and down this flood for 9 days hunting their king, and when they found him, they walked past him and lay at this woman's feet and named her Luna, and I have learned to trust the noses of my pack over the fears of my counselors. Yaira of the crossing, my open hand was still between us. The pack has chosen, I have chosen. The bank you were born on chose you a witch, and the bank across chose you a traitor, and I am asking you in the daylight where both of them can see to let a Wolf-King choose you a queen. But the last choice is yours, as every choice about you has always been yours. My hand is open. It stays open whichever way you answer. Cross to me or send me home. It's your ford. I have faced charging horse and broken shield walls and the black water closing over my head. And I have never in my life waited on anything the way I waited on Yaira of the far crossing, to decide what to do with my open hand in the middle of her river. She looked at it. She looked at both banks, at the west shore that had shunned her and the east shore that had used her, at the war men on both sides holding their breath, at the boy she'd healed standing on his own 2 legs. And then she did the thing that I will carry to the end of my reign, as the finest thing I ever saw a soul do. She did not take my hand. Not first. First she turned, with the whole river watching, with a crown a pace away and hers for the taking. She turned and walked 3 steps back toward the west bank, toward a knot of her own people who had called her witch, and she said in that even carrying voice, "You heard the king. Both banks. That means you too. When Vorn's wounded come to my door, and they will, you'll not spit in the water while I mend them. That's the price of the peace he's offering, and I'll not take it for myself and leave you free to break it." And an old West Bank woman near the front, who had surely called her worse than witch in her time, looked at the healed eastern boy across the water and then at Yaira, and slowly, shamed, nodded. And only then, having settled her own bank first, having made the peace real on the ground before she reached for the crown that offered it, only then did Yaira turn back to me, and cross the shallows the rest of the way, and put her rough, cold healer's hand into my open one. The old gray threw back his head and howled, and the whole pack took it up, and on both banks of the Black River the war men lowered their spears, some slow and some quick, and the sound that went up from the shores was not a battle sound. And I closed my hand around hers, the hand that had reached into the flood and said not one more, and I did not pull her to me or lift her up or make any grand claiming of her, because she was not a thing to be claimed. I only held the hand that had held me in the middle of her river with both banks watching, and I said low for her alone, "In the light," just as you said. "In the light," she agreed, and then because she was Ira and would be to the end, she added, "Your arm's shaking. You've stood too long, you great fool. Come sit down before you fall in the ford, and I have to pull you out all over again." So that is how the war ended on the Black River, not with a battle but at a crossing, not by a king's decree alone, but by a healer settling her own bank before she'd take the peace for herself. Vorn, when my word reached him, was a hard man but not a stupid one, and a warlord who cannot say for certain his rival is dead is a warlord who will take a border he can trust over a war he might lose. The ford at Ashenford held, and then the ford above it, and then slowly the length of the flood. They call it the Luna's Crossing now. Yrah hated the name and could not stop it. Both banks send their wounded there, and neither is asked its water. And the old West Bank woman who nodded that morning taught the rule to the ones who came after until it needed no teaching. My war second Ledric guards that peace more fiercely than any man in Horrors. For a frightened man who is shown his fear was a poverty and forgiven, for it becomes the most faithful keeper of the thing that freed him. He learned to see a kindness without hunting for the lever under it, and it aged the fear out of his face the way it had long since aged out of hers. And I am the Wolf King still, and I rule the Blackwater Valley, and I sit a throne. But I know now the difference between being served and being cared for, between loyalty bought and the plain, unbought good of a hand that reaches into the flood for a stranger and asks nothing. Every morning of my reign I know it, because I wake beside the woman who taught it to me, and some nights still the drowning comes for me in my sleep, the black water closing over my head at the broken causeway, and every time before I can go all the way under, there is a rough cold hand on my chest and a low even voice in the dark, and it says, "You're on the bank. You're on the bank, Halden. I've got you." And the wound goes quiet, the way it did the very first hour, and I come up out of the river into the warm, and I am home. She has a rule about that, she always has.